Our first speaker is going to talk to, a really important issue that impacts our budgets, our perceptions of it within the organization, the way we measure, the way we allocate, the way we design our campaign. And that's this notion of a bow tie, this bow tie. And, in the old days, we'd put our brand out there. We'd live at the front of the funnel, if we would. The pressure now, obviously, is to go deeper into that funnel, drive demand, drive leads, because that's all people think we do in some cases. Maybe facilitate advisor conversations to get that deal. But when you think about it, across our thing, consumption matters. Are they using our platforms? Are they running a lot of credit through our vehicles? Are they doing transactions through our vehicles? Cross-sell still matters a lot. Have they bought 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 services from us? And so there's an acknowledgement that even though the funnel narrows down, that bow tie is emerging. And marketing has something to say about that. You know who those customers are. In most of your organizations, many of your organizations, that's where all the growth potential is in the business. And how does that work? And how do we measure all that? So that's a bit of a pot boiler. And when you think about the notions of short-termism and the struggle to attribute, or even attach a financial value to what we're doing, and we have a great panel on that later on today, I think it's great to start with this notion of the full funnel and the pros and cons of how we measure and how we can maybe even fix bank marketing. And so my neighbor and new friend, Daniel Darst, the CMO of Flagstar Bank, is going to come up and kick us off and really set a nice framing conversation. Later, right after that, we're going to do a panel together, and we'll go through the agenda. So I hope I did a decent job. If you can't sleep at night or actually care about how to use technology and AI to grow in the funnel, I do have some copies of this book if you're not sleeping, and we're around. So I'm really excited about today. I hope I did a good job of kicking off, but certainly Daniel is going to get the program rolling, and let's give it up for Daniel.
Thank you. That was great, Stephen, except mispronouncing my name. It's Darst, D-A-R-S-T. Not to be confused with Jackson Dart, the maybe next hope for the New York Giants, for those of you who are paying attention. Whoa. I don't usually fall over. So I want to start. I have, how many time do I have? Do I have 15 minutes, 30 minutes? I'd love to take questions, but I want to start. Was anybody at the Financial Brand Expo in Las Vegas in April and hear me talk? So thousands of you. So I was one of the speakers there, and it was great. This is a great program too, so don't misinterpret anything I'm saying. But one of the topics that came up was, hey, Daniel, deputy CMO, not CMO, how do you feel about AI? And I was like, this is like how long? 6 months ago, 5 months ago. What I said then, I don't believe anymore. And I bring that up. I'll tell you what I believe today, but not right now. But I bring that up to talk about how stuff changes. And marketing is like the punching bag of corporate life. Now, because it's me talking, I'll just talk about myself. I've only been in the financial services. I've never worked for a fast-moving consumer goods company. I've never worked for healthcare. I've really worked for some large, successful companies, and some companies that I hope, like my current employer, is on the road to success. And I can talk about that differently, different context. But what I wanted to say is that stuff changes all the time. And so I'm holding these index cards. In my career, which is like 27 years, I've had 5, 6 professional coaches assigned to me because either I need the help or someone was trying to send a message to me that I needed the help, but I never paid for any of them. All of these people, they all happened to be female. All of these women were really sharp and really smart, and they all had agenda. Like they had a ticket to success. Like they knew, they were like, hey, Daniel, stop talking and listen to what I'm going to tell you. And one of them was, this thing is called a BlackBerry, and I'm going to show you how to use it. And Let me put this down. And this thing is an app, in the Apple Store, and it's called Notes, and you can do that was the Microsoft one. There was an Apple version of it too. Had all these really interesting programs, and one of them, and it was like my third grade teacher in Wilton, Connecticut, Mrs. Applebaum, was like, use index cards. And I was like, that seems so retrograde, that seems so old-fashioned, because I remember, some teacher I probably had when William Taft was president, saying, index cards are really good. They'll organize your thinking, and then you just go to the card. And I kind of discarded that, like, that's got to not be relevant anymore. I got to use some sort of tech-based platform. So here I am, 100 years later, and it's like, I like these index cards. So I guess what I'm saying is some things change. Some things have a veneer, like a chassis over the engine. The engine is like, you got to have a brain. And that was my real point when I was talking at the Financial Brand Expo. The question was about AI. And I was like, it totally bums me out that copywriters are coming to me with 10,000 headlines that they generated in the last 30 seconds. Like, isn't that stupid? Like, isn't that show like the debasement of society and culture? And I was like, because, what I'm going to come up with better ones was the idea. I think that's what I was saying then, way back in April, was it's a race to mediocrity. We're all going to kind of regress to the mean, and all of our headlines about 6-month CDs are going to be the same, right? Because we're all putting in the same prompts. And I've got this squad of copywriters on my team. Squad is an overstatement, but I've got 2 full-time, and part of me. It's like, we'll come up with great headlines for those 6-month CDs. And the reality is, if you're good with ChatGPT, you probably don't need a squad of copywriters anymore. Now, that might not be the case tomorrow, but that's where I am today on October 7th, or whatever today is, 8th, yeah. So things change. So just like these index cards are really relevant to me today, I mean, some of them are kind of blank, but that's it's a good prompt, because when you're talking in front of a bunch of people, you want to hold something. So things change. So that's really what I wanted to start with, which is, I'm a practitioner. How many of you are actual clients who work for a bank or a financial institution and do marketing? So I know you're all shy, but I'm going to guess more than half of you. So that's what I am too. That's what I do. Like, I have all of these things I have to get done every day. I have lots of committees and lots of processes and lots of audit committees and HR things, and I have to take compliance tests just like you do all the time. But I also have to do marketing for a big bank. I'm not really here to talk about Flagstar. I'm very proud of the bank I work for. We've gone through some shape-shifting, some form creation changes over the last 18 months, and I'm really happy to be on the other side of that and very excited about it. Now, I like to start with this picture of this guy, because it's sort of what I looked like 10 years ago. That was a joke, but you know what I mean. I thought, like, oh, they're sort of suggesting me in, circa 2000 or 2010. But what I really wanted to show you is this picture. So this is not my son. I do have 4 children, but this is not one of them. But this is this sort of feeling of, holy smokes, is this thing ever going to stop? Is this, this carousel, this kind of like crazy ride of constantly changing the goalposts? I use a lot of sports metaphors because, I'm an American male, so I'm obsessed with sports. This guy is like freaking out, and he's only like 10 years old. So I'm like 50, 60 years old, and I'm freaking out. My title and my thing is full funnel, or is it full fail? When I started my first corporate job, I worked for a company which some of you will know, and all of you will know what it became, was called Smith Barney. Who knows the name Smith Barney? Oh, that's really good. Okay, we became Citigroup. I just landed there by luck. I never took a marketing course in my life. I'm sort of proud to say that. Everything I know about marketing I learned from salespeople. And that's, if you were to write down 5 thoughtful things I say, that would be one of them, is everything I think that I do halfway okay is stuff I picked up from being tight with sales guys and saleswomen. So at Smith Barney, we dominated. It was us and Merrill Lynch, and our brand was so strong. And our brand was strong. As a kid, there were these great ads on TV. So this is top of funnel stuff, starring John Houseman. And he said at Smith Barney, they, not we, they earn it. They earn your business, they earn your respect, and so forth. And being an aspirational kid with a lot of student debt, I was really, really impressed with that. I thought, oh my God, what a great brand. I want to be a successful, older man. Like, I think it was sort of based on like Harvard Law School. I think there was a movie at the same time where he played that part. It was just fantastic. That was a brand. And as a consumer, if you had enough money to be a Smith Barney client, you wanted to be part of that brand. And when I got into this game of banking and marketing, selling, revenue generation, that was really inspiring to me. It was like, and I'm working for Smith Barney, it's like, this is a great place to work. So as an employee, just one of probably 10,000 employees at the time, I had a lot of identification with the brand. It was fun. So let me just keep moving along here. All right, this is me. So I'm the deputy CMO at Flagstar. I'll say a couple of quick things. Deputy CMO means I'm the number 2 guy, just to be clear. I do a lot of stuff. The guy I work for is terrific. He's more introverted. He's much more of a data technology guy. As I always say, like I am too, but he really is. I like the art as well as the science of marketing, and that's what I'm going to kind of talk about today, is how it all comes together and keeps moving and changing. So one of the things that I am going to talk about is kind of short-termism. Stephen mentioned it, and something I noticed in, let's say, in the last year, in the last decade, is most of the executive huddle. So I work for a $100 billion bank. We've got, some pretty serious brain power at the top of our organization, whom I really, really do respect. They're really looking quarter to quarter. And of course they are. We're a publicly traded company, even though a sizable amount of us is owned by a private equity firm. And the private equity firm is looking quarter to quarter, so we have to deliver. It's not like I'm sort of, flying some flag of, oh no, we should be brand oriented and we should have all sorts of noble ideas about, the meaning and the storytelling, which I'm going to talk about. But I understand, like all of you who are in the same sort of position I am, we have to show results. So we have to make a lot of hard decisions all the time. And that involves media mix. It involves where we're allocating dollars to. Stephen mentioned paid, let's say paid social as an example. Our DSP is the Trade Desk. Anybody here use Trade Desk as their platform? Okay. It's a dominant platform. That's how we distribute content. These are all tons of decisions we're constantly optimizing. I'm going to kind of kick the tires of optimization a little when we get into it. So, here's my story. And by the way, for those of you who are sort of creative, I tried to use the background, the slides. I don't know if anybody here from the group here, but you'll see I had to use white type, which is ghastly, but you'll see I'm just kind of reacting to what I had. So I'm saying a long time ago, like last year, 2 years ago, this is how the world looked. You would kind of put together, don't take pictures of these, I tried to disguise, but this was kind of what I would have considered, B+, pretty smart thinking. How are we going to get into this market? How are we going to kind of strategize and create, different personas in different parts of the market, and what sort of scale are we going to use, and how am I going to turn this into a deck? This isn't a deck I presented to executives. It was the deck I would do internally, and then spruce it up a little, cut out tons of words, move it up. Then I'd say let's talk about the market. Now, one of the realities, I guess you can look at this one a little, is knowing who you are. So for those of you who've been paying attention, I started talking about Smith Barney. So we kind of cater to rich people, right? Like, again, if you were around in 1995, you'd know that. And so we had a sense of who we were. I've worked for, I think, 6 companies in my life. I've never worked for a bank or an investment shop that doesn't want to cater to the top of the market, right? So every place I go, and this is fine, and I'm guilty. All the things I'm sort of throwing like little darts at, I'm guilty of the same stuff. Like I'm not better, and I'm not even that good, I think, at what I do. I get by. I think, you always say, yeah, we're interested in emerging affluent. I want that 30-year-old who's an emerging partner at a top 50 law firm. That's my client. That's who we are. That's what our product, and we got to get our product set there, but we're not quite there yet, but there are a lot of those Henrys, right? High earners. It's fine. It's all good. Every place I know, and when I go to these conferences, and I talk to ladies who do what I do, it's like we're all talking about the same thing. Oh yeah, that emerging affluent, that's us. It's just not you. Like everybody's got that same secret. So you do these things, you talk about who they are. One of the realities, and I don't have a picture of it here, but I'm just showing you this. So for those of you who are looking at these slides intently, language, this is a pretty decent deck. I'm showing it off to some people who are senior, and they're going to be like, yes, no, Daniel, change this. This is pretty good. We can, whatever. But then I want $20 million for a paid budget. Like, well, how about 2? And you're like, well, that's kind of changes the entire landscape of what we're talking about. That's just corporate life. And part of being successful and surviving and being able to do the kinds of things that I've had the privilege of doing for 30 years is being adaptable. So now I'm living in a world that it's exclusive. I mean, AI dominates, lower funnel thinking, short-termism dominates, and you know what? I'm adjusting, and you're all going to adjust too. I'm just going to give you a couple of thoughts. And then you get to this, and then you get here. So these are, this is the slide. So the balance is really tipping, and maybe that's fine. I don't know. The way I feel about all of these conversations is I'm just an actor on the stage. I'm in the middle of it. I'm using AI. I'm using large language models. I'm using tons of API plugins that give me data about people's behavioral attitudes, about product propensity. I'm looking at, what's most relevant to a successful 40-year-old, to a blue-collar 50-year-old, to a wealthy 69-year-old who lives in the Hamptons. That's a Long Island thing, for those of you who don't know. Or that's just an age demographic cohort in Epsilon. So like you, the world keeps changing, and I have a couple of thoughts. I have a couple of success stories in my own career, and I've got some things that we failed at. But again, 2 things. Everything good I know about marketing, I feel like I learned from salespeople, and I'm an actor, like all of you are, in the middle of a play. You're not Shakespeare. You're not writing this play. You're an actor, and if you're lucky, you're on stage. And that's how I feel about my career. Like, I'm lucky. I'm on stage, and I get to do this stuff. So here's some of my favorite topics, and thank you for the applause on these awesome slides I put together. So I think addiction is really a relevant way to think about it. I mean, all the folks I work with are just addicted to data, whether they want to be or they don't want to be, because attribution, who hears that word coming from management all the time, right? Daniel, can you attribute the sale to anything you've done or your team's done? And what do I say? No. Of course I don't say that. I say, well, of course, sure. And then I pull up some crazy slide like this. I'm like, thank you. Enough said. But here's the deal. If you dig into the data, what you find is that marketing will still, and there's like this quote from somebody who was probably extremely charming in the 50s, and he was like, I don't know what part, half of marketing works, but I don't know which half it is, or something like that. It's a great quote, and hopefully all of you are familiar with what I'm talking about. I sort of still see myself more in the Don Draper mode than in the data mode. Seriously, I mean, I'm not as good looking and probably not as clever as that actor, but I'm looking for the killer idea, I'm looking for the killer differentiation, and then I want to take that differentiation and I want to amplify it through the funnel. So if you're writing a third smart thing I said, you want to find that differentiation, you want to amplify it through the funnel, from upper funnel awareness to consideration to purchase, because that's how you're going to get clients for life. And what we don't want is we don't want clients who are just shopping your hot rate. What you don't want is a client who says, I was on Betterment, and then they screwed up my login, so I'm pissed off, so I'm moving my stuff to you, I'm parking it for 2 seconds, and then I'm going to move to another fintech app. You want that client for life. So put these back on. So I feel like guys like me and you, certainly my management, product people, we just all become hostages to data, to short-termism. And it's like, I always talk about engineering runs the table. It's a gambling reference. That was my Las Vegas comment at the beginning of the conversation. Engineers run the table, and it's crazy. This first happened to me about 20 years ago when I realized like all these guys on my team were engineers. They weren't what I would have thought of as marketing people like from the 90s. And I was really working with some really smart people, and they would kind of present to me, because I've always kind of fortunately been in a management role. They'd say, hey, here's the data, Daniel, what do you think? And it would be like looking at a big, big spreadsheet, and certain cells within that were green. You know where I'm going, and certain cells within that were amber, and certain cells within that were red. And unless you had the patience of a Job, I don't know if I got the right reference there, you're going to be like, well, let's go with the green ones, right? Because you're not going to say, no, well, your data's probably wrong. We'd optimize, and you say, well, the stuff in green is obviously working, so let's just stick with that. We all became kind of drinking that Kool-Aid, became hostages to this concept that the data was going to really drive our decision-making. And that data, our other favorite word, I think Stephen mentioned, is attribution, but the data really is all about production. It's all about who opened an account, who clicked through, who started the app, who finished the app, and God, who funded the account. So the other sort of killer word for all of us is abandonment, right? So you spend $1 million on impressions, clicks, click-throughs, starting the app, finishing the app, you're down to like, 2%? And then who funds it? It's 0.2%. I mean, obviously I'm exaggerating the data. So I was telling, I have I have twins who are 15, they're in 10th grade. I was explaining this to my daughter, who's really smart, because she was like, isn't like direct mail stupid? Because, we have a mailbox like most of you, and you get all this stuff, and you're like, holy smokes. And she's like, Dad, do you do this? And I'm like, guilty. She's like, well, how well does it work? And I said, I'm going to give you a number that's so small, you're not going to have dinner. You're going to think like, the world's come to an end, like everything you knew is wrong. And I told her like 0.02% or something like that. She's like, do you have your decimal point wrong? Do you mean 2%? I was like, no, I'm actually good at math. I meant 0.02%. She was like, why do you do it? And I said, because, sounding like my executive huddle, those 65 new accounts are worth a lot have high value, but only have high value if they stay with us. We'll get into that in a sec. So again, excuse the sort of hyper-local reference, but I think, as an opening presentation, I think sort of getting a sense of the fullness of life and how it affects all these things we do, and how your kids, who are often a lot sharper than I am, kind of bring to it. So brand is in captivity. What I mean by that is there's such an emphasis on the lower funnel, we lose sight of the brand. And I think the sameness in how banks look and how banks talk, and the kind of the masquerade that banks and marketing people like myself, we pretend that our lower funnel animation is actually our brand, is really dangerous. Because I'm going to show you a slide in a minute that's going to hopefully blow your mind. So I asked ChatGPT for 50 headlines for a new CD, and it took ChatGPT 8 seconds. So at the beginning of this conversation, I said, when I was at Financial Brand Expo, I kind of went on this thing like, take an extra 15 minutes, Peon and my team, and write me a better headline. I can't believe it. I didn't say Peon. And I didn't make the hand gesture. These are awesome headlines. You know what? And a human did not write them. And as they say in popular culture, respect. I mean, this is some good stuff. I just highlighted 4 that in a sort of blind test I have a creative huddle every day at 11 with a couple of guys on my team. My team's like 15 people. And I sometimes will drop in something that I used AI for, and just see if anyone says whoa. Not at all. Everything moves through. So this is an example 20 years ago, you'd have an agency. You know, I've worked with some of the top agencies in New York. When I was at Smith Barney, I spent quite a lot of time at Bank of America and JP Morgan. So I know what, good creative people can do. They can't do this. And you know how long it would take, those of you who work with big agencies? Endless. It'd be like 3 weeks, and oh, Daniel, we need to push that meeting to next Thursday. And you're like, whoa, isn't that Thanksgiving? That's right, let's do it in December. That is my experience with agencies, and I love all these guys, but that's how life really works. So about 8 seconds later, I got this. And then you get this, and this is sort of my green, amber, red slide. Somebody's highlighting, and you're usually there with some executive from the business, and they're like, okay, let's go with the red boxes, and you're done. So my point for this first part of the conversation is we are hostages. I am too, even though I consider myself a phenomenally thoughtful, insightful, creative corporate guy, and that's just how it works. So I've showed this slide. I did this presentation at another conference recently, well, different, but I use this slide. Everybody loves the slide because everybody's hungry. And they say, I love that scallop. And the joke I normally would say is like, this is how I cook. I usually would scar the pan, but I'd end up with one decent scallop. And then my wife and children would tell me they don't like scallops, so I get to eat it. But I guess what I really want to say here is flash versus finish. So retention, deepening, cross-sell, primacy. These are like the 4 key vocabulary words, right? If you're not retaining the client, so let's say we all put out a 4.5% CD rate. We get a lot of clicks. People start the app. They finish the application, and what did I say? 64 of them fund it. You're like home run, home run, home run. But what if they're just hot money? What if they're just chasing the hot money? And a lot of them are. So flash versus finish, short-term heat versus long-term strength. What I hope we can all as marketing people keep our mind on is that upper funnel, that idea of really establishing an identity, a message, a story, and a personality that actually is genuine, so it's fully cooked through, not like seared tuna, even though I do love that too. It's cooked through and they understand your brand, so that the bank or the credit union or whomever you work for is an actual fully baked, fully developed personality of a partner, of a not just a vendor, but a partner, somebody who's actually there for you as a client, as a consumer, as a family, as a business. I do a lot of B2B, and I'll talk about that too. So I was going to say this is actual work when I first got to Flagstar, the days of having big creative discussions. And so like when I was at Smith Barney, Citigroup, I'll tell you, we had some great campaigns. We would literally do focus groups. We'd invite people in, offer them Diet Coke and cookies and things like that. We'd show them creative stuff, and they'd be like, I like this, and there'd always be one really dominant personality who would drive the whole thing. Like they'd all start out as like 12 Angry Men or something. They'd start out like, oh, I'm not sure, and then like this one woman or some guy would be like, I hate that, but I love this. And then by the end, everybody would love what the dominant person liked. And then I would go to my management and say, yeah, we focus grouped all this stuff, and they all chose lower left. And they'd be like, Daniel, thank you, great work. And I'd be like, thank you. It's not like that anymore. We could have this thing tested online by 11 o'clock. And I'd have data, and this is the crazy thing about data, which I'm sure you're all experiencing. The responses to all these could be different by like 2.2 basis points, right? But let's say the one that wins is the lower left, different kinds of phones. It's actually kind of clever. I actually came up with it. Most of my work usually is not very good. This one I sort of liked. But the point here is, if we chose the one on the lower left, what would we be doing? We'd be discarding the other 3. Bang. Right? Like you'd never see them again. It's not like there's somebody in your team who's going to be like, hey, Carrie, what about that wonderful one of the 2 guys in I can't even remember, the lower right. It's just gone. So the optimization is a really dangerous protocol. It's a really dangerous activity that we all get hung up on, because what you're doing is you're saying this one's the winner, but the other 3, we just forget them. So that's something that's a little scary. Nobody denies that we're living in short-termism. So this is some data. If like the Binet and Fields, who do all this good work on long-term versus short-term. This is some of their data, and some of the stuff comes from McKinsey, excuse me. People don't say, oh, my insight is poor. They just say we're focused on data. And I'm often sort of compromised in a situation where I'm looking at the data, but I'm sort of suggesting that my insight is part of that as well. And I think that's one of the great sort of mistakes we all make. And we call that the illusion of knowing. So we're measuring the surface as opposed to the story. And where I want to ultimately take this conversation, and obviously I'll be around today and tomorrow, is talking about storytelling and how that's, not that it's a lost art, back to my Don Draper stuff. It's like, whatever you're approaching, and I try to do this all the time, whenever I'm approaching a project, when I'm in the middle of, 10, 12 different campaigns at Flagstar, some private banks, some corporate C&I stuff, some investment banking, treasury management, and a lot of consumer, small business, big business, individuals, nonprofits, all these kinds of products for nonprofits. We're trying to always bring it back up to what's the big story here? What's the awareness? How do people know us? Because the short-termism and the need to attribute success to marketing really can cripple you. And so you end up just focusing, say, okay, well, I'm going to move 2% of my budget from paid search with Google to a different paid search variation using Trade Desk, for instance. That's very dangerous. Trust is a challenge. This is just an example of that funnel, not the funnel that's my title of the story of the talk here, but the idea of the lower funnel. And then I want to end up with I want to talk about masquerade. So this is the game that is, I think, the dangerous game. When we pretend that the metrics are the brand, and we pretend the metrics carry meaning. And I have been, I kid you not, just in 2025, I've probably been in 10 meetings with the people, certainly above me in the organization, who would tell you, yeah, I saw the data, that's who we are, that's how people know us. Or their experience with a client will kind of sort of self-define how they look at the data that I or my manager and I are presenting. They'll say, yeah, that's how we're known. We're totally known that way. And that's how a decision gets made. In the old days, you present something and they'd say, well, the CEO's secretary will look at it and decide if she likes it, or the CEO's wife. This is obviously in a male society. It's sort of like that now. You're presenting data and you're hoping that there's a connection between what you're presenting and what the decision maker. Oh, this is just sort of funny. So I took the same list and I put these other ones that are in the chartreuse in front of the same group of people. And I said, I took a spin on this other stuff, and what do you think? And they're like, oh, this is great too. So my point here again is, the world has really changed. Feedback trap. I mean, you don't need a long explanation from me, but this stuff just goes around and around and around and around. And you're constantly saying, this is good, this is bad. If it's bad, I'm going to change it. If it's good, I'm going to do more of it. My last slide is really about storytelling and the compass. So in any reality of a bank, you have to have a true north. You have to stand for something, and it's whether you're actually spending money on branding at the top of the funnel or not. You have to say, this is who we are, this is what we're about, these are the types of clients, the types of customers we want to engage with. Whether you're 90% digital and 10%, human contact, or the inverse of that, you have to stand for something. So I say, this is a line. It's you got to ignite it. So a lot of what I try to do, sometimes it's more subtle, less obvious because I don't have a budget for it, or I don't have a pulpit to talk about it with executives, is you're trying to ignite the brand, you're trying to get that story right, and you're trying to make people pay attention at the top of the funnel so they'll have a sort of integrated experience with you. That's the end game. Now, my monitor feedback is saying no time for questions, and it's apologizing to me. I can take a question. Does somebody want to ask me something? Just one. Oh, come on. Well, there you go. Yeah, go ahead.
So the balance between art of marketing and the data-driven
Correct.
But being that they're all driven off of algorithms, they're all driven off of data. So how do you integrate in that story with the creativity, the art? If the algorithm doesn't like it, they're not putting budget toward it.
That's a great question. I don't know how to answer it.
Appreciate your honesty.
No, I'll give you sort of, like the best answer I can give you. We're going to live and die by the algorithms, if we want to keep being employed and get paid. I think the challenge is when you're looking at that lower funnel media mix and you're moving, you're using your trade desk platform or you're sort of moving between paid search and social and so forth, or digital out of home, you need to try to say, can I link this back to a story at the top? And the challenge, and I didn't really show it here, I showed you 50 different headlines for 6-month CDs. The challenge is you want to avoid this sort of rush to sameness, this sort of regression to the mean where everything looks the same. When I started by talking about, using index cards versus a BlackBerry versus some cool app and all that sort of stuff, at the end of the day, you're still going to be evaluated on the new client and then the lifetime value of that client. So that is the challenge. And again, we're all living with it, so it's tough stuff. That's the best answer I can give you. But that's what makes these jobs actually really challenging is, you're kind of walking a fine line. It's not a tightrope, you're just walking a really narrow place. And you're trying to do right by the brand, and you want to do right by the imperative of driving business into your bank. So I guess I'm done.
Well, no, you're not done. Sit down. You're down. We're going to get more of you.
I wanted to hear the big applause. Thank you, guys.
Sorry.